Hi, my name is Noah Meir, and I am the CEO of the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy. With us today, we have Professor Richard Joel, past President of Yeshiva University and also former President of Hillel International. The Charney Forum for New Diplomacy was formed in order to provide tools to navigate the disruption in diplomacy that was caused by the digital and information revolution. As someone who wisely utilized technology to enhance Jewish education on all levels, I would love to hear your thoughts about the repercussions of the information revolution that is still very much underway.
I have to first engage in true confessions. I have always been a fairly strong critic of the current uses of technology in terms of communication, feeling that the notion of virtual is different than real community and real discussion. Until the last 3 months, when all of a sudden the world was turned on its head, and we've been able to see how, in fact, if there is a sense of community, it can be morphed into using the technology that we now have to be able to develop a virtual intimacy. Any technology is not an idea or an ideal. It's a tool. So much for communication as it was for personal statement, which in the modern Orthodox community usually revolves around the Shabbat table, has now became institutionalized, and anyone can communicate. There have been great challenges to journalism, and now it's as easy as going onto the computer, writing something outrageous, having a blog, and everyone knows about it. The noise comes with any development, but how do you focus in on the use of that technology, not for me to worry about irresponsible newspapers will write, not to worry about the blogs, but how do we use this as a tool to connect one to the other, as we're doing now? There has not been a situation such as the pandemic that has really pushed us, and it's a great statement to civilized society, to use it for good.
So as a follow-up to what we discussed about, information as a disruption and digital technology and the fact that, we all have our phones 24/7 like slot machines. What effect do you think that if we're looking at that on itself, but then we also add what's happened in the past couple of months with COVID-19, what effect will have on community and on globalization?
I think the first effect it's having is that people tend to be relaxing in the use of technology, in the sense that we're not being stiff and so controlled. We're learning how to have conversation. We're learning how to have an interaction with another person that is person to person. Therefore, I think it is creating more of a chance at a virtual intimacy. I think we're also seeing that these kind of conversations and these kind of exchanges of ideas don't need to be government to government, but if it's people to people. Now, people to people doesn't mean that's in exchange for or as a substitute for government to government, but it also puts the government and leaders on notice that they have to be prepared both to communicate beyond their narrow shells, and they also have to be able to listen. I think when you have community and you need to adapt it to a virtual format, you can do it. Like the modern Orthodox community here, it has remained amazingly tight and strong. When the synagogues were closed, the online presence went up, and it was very personal, and it was very accessible, and people used it to see how they could help. It wasn't a replacement for contact. It was often a vehicle for contact. Something as simple as ordering food online, which of course we had before, but never on such a mass basis. The end product is not that you get an email with virtual food. There's an abundance of communication now. And I think it's because, number one, we had it as a community. Number two, we can't function without it. We need the intimacy of community. You need all of those things that require it. So in the absence of it, it doesn't take its place, but it's become an addendum. When the synagogues open up, it does not mean that the Zoom conversations are going to end or that the conferences are going to end. It will supercharge the use of virtual meeting technology, not as a replacement, but as one of the tools. See, I think one of the things we've lost in society, certainly in the United States, is neighborhood. And neighborhood means you know the person next to you, you care about the person next to you, you realize that we are involved together and we are mutually dependent. And in mass society, we've lost that. So Israel has the opportunity to kind of take the best of both because it is the homeland for a global people, right? We are all together, but because we have so many different influences and even as a society, so many different backgrounds, we could have the capacity to do that. But I think there's a need for neighborhood.
I think it was Ben Gurion who initially they talked about the Israel Defense Forces. The idea was this will become a melting pot. And in many ways, it did become an equalizer because you had people from the periphery and people from the center all coming together.
My undergraduate professor said in explaining national priorities, he said, there's this pie and it's only so large and you can cut it into different pieces. And you have to decide if they're equal pieces and you have to decide which are larger and smaller. Are they different for different needs? You can't make the pie larger. You can cut it smaller, but there are ramifications to that. And that is the process of priorities. It's also the process of diplomacy. How do you take what we are and say, how do we use it best? How do we share it? But I would kind of say in a qualitarian way, in a way that the whole is larger than the sum of its parts, but the parts aren't all identical.
So one of the things that I read as I was preparing for this interview is that you defined leadership as a vision with an implementation strategy. We're looking at this global crisis, and it's a global crisis. Doesn't see any borders, doesn't see color, race, anything. What sort of leadership traits would you like to see in dealing with something that's really affecting each and every one of us?
Ultimately, leadership means taking responsibility. That's why you don't need to be in charge of an enterprise or a country or a project. Leadership means you don't need a crowd around you. You don't need followers. You need to say, I am responsible. The question of then how do you lead, what will make you a leader in terms of groups, is I think there are two parts together. One is a vision and the other is an implementation strategy. If you concern yourself with the implementation strategy, you're a manager, which is a wonderful thing, but that's what you are.
And what about someone who's just envisioning, just comes with a vision, but not good in execution?
I mean, you could say that some in academia spend their time doing research to be able to forward or proffer a vision. So academia takes thoughts that were or new ideas that develop and try to develop them fully and contextualize them. There are people who come to believe something and then they advocate for it. You know, you had a Mark Zuckerberg who thought there was this thing at Harvard and it's changed the world. But had Mark not said, how do we make this happen? How do we guide the growth and control the growth? Would have been something, but it wouldn't have been true leadership. When you are, and the role of a leader is to articulate that vision, not just to say it, but to inspire people to own it. That develops into ideas. The government's job is not to generate those ideas, it's to find those ideas, to coalesce those ideas, to turn those ideas into an implementation strategy. The current governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, he figured it out, first of all, you have to talk to people, not give speeches at them. It's not about you. He works very hard to make comprehensible. There is a sense of strength and there is a sense of confidence. The technology is it makes us all very close, while at the same time, through that closeness, makes us extremely vulnerable and bigadol, in a large way, makes us anonymous. It uses this technology now to bridge the sense of invisibility and allows people to be people. But on a global basis, the more we see leaders who convey a sense of strength, a sense of vulnerability, a sense of communicating with other people so that there is a neighborhood of nations, to a degree that we believe in transparency, make things accessible. You have the opportunity to enunciate a vision and to press on the implementation strategy that says, our vision is we should all be well. It's not going to happen tomorrow unless we all do our parts, we all talk to each other, and unless we all are disciplined. Cuomo alone can't give it. It requires everybody, a community of nations. And that comes from a popular desire. I will say one of the problems is we're not all going to be on the same page. We should be careful to make sure that we keep boundaries and we allow for separateness.
So what steps do you think we can take as a society in order to increase our resilience in such a difficult time?
The notion of resilience is, first of all, you have to maintain your concentric circles of intimacy. Husband, wife, and God is the first circle. Second, husband, wife, God, and your children. And then your siblings, and your family, and your neighbors, and your people, and your community, and your country, and your world. That's necessary because it's not all the same. The first step of resilience is don't be alone. Secondly, to use the great gifts now of virtual community, to stay aware, to make up your own mind as to who you think is making sense, and to realize that you're part of the community and that therefore you need each other. We have to find ways to keep talking to each other and find what's mutual. That's what resilience is about. Also teaching yourself the self-discipline and to realize also that we have an obligation to be healthy. But at the same time, you really have to realize and how you now have to make a difference. Too often, the people who are making noise drown out the people who are trying to sing. And we have to work at that. And we have to work to have leaders who care about that. And ultimately, what the Charney Forum needs to do is encourage people to talk to each other and to talk to each other in the kind of settings, with the kind of framework that involves other people and ultimately can also translate itself into policy.
Speaking of leaders, Winston Churchill famously said, never let a good crisis go to waste. I'd love to hear just some thoughts about what opportunities you identify here, either globally, locally.
Well, one way to make sure you make a good crisis not go to waste is not to posit that we should always live in crisis. We just have to look beyond crisis. Crisis has already benefited in strong ways. The world now knows that it needs personal protection, protective equipment, and it can't be caught that way. We've been really good at globalization, but we've been so good at globalization that nobody is making masks in the United States. You need all of those circles, but you can't forget the beginning. The other thing that's maybe most important is that I find so many more people say hello to each other through their masks on the street. And everybody is saying, keep safe. I think there is something of a renaissance of our saying, let's care for each other. Look, I think there are things in the actions of some of our leaders that we should learn not to do. I hope we have learned to look for people who have a royal reach, who really want to say, let's go beyond ourselves. Let's realize what's most important. It's not, even as we look for technological proficiency, even as we look to get the different cures, even as we look to have the protective equipment, even as we look to know how to Zoom better. It's all for the purpose of preserving community, of giving me the opportunity to have my children and grandchildren live their lives, to give hope a chance. So the real lesson of a crisis is give hope a chance.